Before I even thought of making this video, I actually paused for a second and asked myself something real. Why does everyone see the Sigma male as if he's the villain? The more that question sat with me, the more it revealed a truth people don't want to admit. Society doesn't fear the dangerous man, it fears the independent one. The man who doesn't obey. The man who doesn't flinch. The man who isn't controlled by applause or threatened by disapproval. And when you put a man like that into a world built on emotional dependence, groupthink, and fragile egos, there's only one label they can give him. Villain. They don't call him the villain because he destroys things. They call him the villain because he doesn't let them destroy him. They don't call him the villain because he's cold. They call him the villain because he doesn't hand his warmth to people who haven't earned it. They don't call him the villain because he's heartless. They call him the villain because he doesn't let the world drain his heart dry. When you refuse to play by their rules, they rewrite you as the villain. And the Sigma male? He doesn't argue. He doesn't defend himself. He doesn't audition for the role of hero. He accepts the misunderstanding like a crown. Because deep down, he knows one thing. Being the villain in someone else's story is the price of being the author of your own. Sigma males do not fit into society's templates. They don't chase validation like oxygen. They don't soften their edges to make insecure people comfortable. They don't explain their decisions to people who haven't earned a seat at their table. And because the world doesn't understand a man who doesn't need it, the world labels him incorrectly. Not misunderstood. Not mysterious. Not different. Villain. Why? Because a man who thinks for himself is unpredictable. A man who protects his peace is selfish. A man who doesn't beg for acceptance is dangerous. A man who walks alone is threatening because he proves something most men don't want to face. Solitude is survivable. So here's the reality. Sigma males make peace with the villain role because they understand something most people don't. Approval is optional. Authenticity is not. And if being authentic makes them the villain, then so be it. What follows are 10 psychologically heavy, deeply grounded reasons why Sigma males embrace being the villain, not through chaos, ego, or rebellion, but through clarity, independence, and brutal self-respect. 1. He makes peace with the villain role because he refuses to shrink for anybody. A Sigma male understands that society doesn't reward truth. It rewards compliance. People want the kind of man who bends, who apologizes for existing too loudly, who edits himself to fit the room. But a Sigma doesn't shrink. He doesn't dilute his personality to avoid triggering someone's insecurity. And whenever a man refuses to downsize himself for comfort, people label him intimidating, arrogant, or threatening. He's none of those things. He's simply done pretending. He's done tiptoeing. He's done shrinking. And if that makes him the villain, he'll hold the title without blinking. If being yourself looks like rebellion to them, you were never meant to fit their script. 2. He accepts the villain label because he isn't here to be understood. A Sigma male knows that the world doesn't want to understand him, it wants to categorize him. People search for simple explanations because complexity threatens them. But the Sigma refuses to simplify himself for their convenience. He will not hand out explanations, emotional maps, or personality manuals. Because he doesn't need people to understand him. Because he doesn't need validation to function. Because he doesn't need anyone to decode him. The villain label comes from their confusion. His peace comes from not caring. Being misunderstood hurts only when you depend on being understood. 3. He's unmanipulable, and that alone makes him the villain. People try to control what they can't influence. They rely on guilt, emotional pressure, intimidation, and social expectations to manipulate others. But the Sigma male is immune. He doesn't move under guilt. He doesn't respond to pressure. He doesn't negotiate with manipulation. So when people can't use him, they accuse him. When they can't control him, they demonize him. When they can't extract value from him, they vilify him. When manipulation fails, blame begins. He doesn't fight the blame. He just walks away. 4. He walks alone. And society always fears the lone wolf. Humans fear what doesn't belong to the group. A man who thinks alone, walks alone, chooses alone, and acts alone is a threat to the herd. The Sigma male is that man, not by rebellion, but by instinct. Whenever a man refuses to follow the crowd calls him dangerous. Whenever he refuses to adopt their beliefs, they call him arrogant. Whenever he refuses to blend in, they call him the villain. The Sigma understands that the lone wolf is always misunderstood by the pack. That's why he doesn't try to explain himself. He knows society doesn't fear villains, it fears independent minds. The man who walks alone becomes the monster in the stories of the crowd. Chart 5. He doesn't need to be liked. And people hate that kind of freedom. Most people operate like hostages to approval. Their self-esteem rises and falls with applause. But the Sigma male? He's built differently. He doesn't crave the high of being liked. He doesn't fear the pain of being disliked. This makes him untouchable. This makes him uncontrollable. This makes him powerful. And power always triggers insecurity. So the world calls him unkind, cold, ruthless, villainous. But all he did was refuse to depend on public opinion. A man who isn't afraid to be hated becomes impossible to control. 6. He speaks truth without dressing it up, and truth offends. Fragile egos, Sigma males don't sugarcoat. They don't dilute truth with comfort. They don't protect illusions to avoid conflict. Their honesty is sharp, precise, and sometimes uncomfortable, not because they want to hurt people, but because they refuse to lie. But fragile egos can't handle raw truth. They need illusions to survive. So when the Sigma speaks plainly, they take offense. They paint him as the bad guy because reality feels like an attack. He doesn't soften the truth. He doesn't apologize for it. He lets people call him the villain and moves on. Truth doesn't need to be pretty to be real. 7. His boundaries feel like barriers, and people hate barriers. They can't cross. A Sigma male has boundaries that don't bend. Not for guilt, not for tears, not for manipulation. He protects his time, his focus, his energy, and his emotional world like a fortress. And people who are used to easy access interpret this as hostility. They call him selfish because he won't sacrifice himself. They call him cold because he won't be used. They call him the villain because he values his peace more than their comfort. But boundaries aren't barriers, they are self-respect. The moment you protect yourself, you become the villain to those who benefited from your lack of protection. 8. He doesn't explain himself. And silence terrifies people who expect obedience. When people demand explanations, they're not seeking understanding, they're seeking control. They want reasons they can argue, emotions they can twist, and decisions they can influence. But the Sigma gives nothing. His silence becomes threatening. His autonomy becomes suspicious. His independence becomes villainous. People fill in the blanks with their insecurities, fears, and projections. They create their own version of him, usually the villain. When you refuse to explain, they create the explanation that suits them. 9. He doesn't play the hero. Especially when being the hero requires self-sacrifice. Society loves the man who breaks himself to keep everyone else comfortable. The dependable hero. The selfless fixer. The emotional sponge. The man who bleeds so others don't have to. The Sigma male refuses this story. He will not destroy himself for anyone. He will not pour from an empty cup. He will not sacrifice himself for people who wouldn't do the same. And when a man chooses himself, they call him selfish. When he refuses to fix their messes, they call him heartless. When he chooses peace over people-pleasing, they call him the villain. Refusing to die for others doesn't make you the villain, it makes you alive. 10. He chooses himself, even if it means becoming the villain in everyone else's story. At the end of the day, the Sigma male is not trying to be the hero or the villain. He is trying to be whole. He is trying to be free. He is trying to be himself in a world that demands masks, scripts, and obedience. And whenever a man chooses himself, whenever he chooses peace over approval, whenever he chooses authenticity over acceptance, whenever he chooses self-respect over self-sacrifice, he becomes the villain in the narratives of those who depended on his compliance. The Sigma male accepts this. He knows peace is expensive, and one of the costs is letting people hate you for choosing it. The villain is just the hero of a story told by someone who wanted to control him. On a final note, at the end of everything, the Sigma male doesn't wear the villain label with shame, he wears it with accuracy. Not because he wants to be feared, not because he enjoys being misunderstood, but because he understands that a man who chooses himself will always be the villain in the stories of those who wanted to choose for him. His solitude becomes suspicious. His boundaries become offensive. His independence becomes threatening. And his refusal to break on command becomes the act that seals his fate in the eyes of the insecure. The Sigma male doesn't seek to prove anyone wrong. He doesn't chase redemption arcs. He doesn't beg to be seen as the hero. He walks forward knowing that peace demands sacrifice. And one of those sacrifices is public approval. He knows the world prefers obedient men, not sovereign ones. It prefers predictable men, not untouchable ones. It prefers men who fold, not men who refuse. So he accepts the label. He embraces the shadows others throw on him. He carries the misunderstandings without letting them rewrite his truth, because he knows something most people never learn. If being the hero requires betraying yourself, then being the villain is the only honest role left. And with that truth, he chooses the path that has always belonged to him, unbent, unapologetic, and entirely his own.